Army Sergeant Calvin Wilhite Jr. was born in 1989. From an early age, he had a strong sense of duty, which led him to join the United States Army. As a soldier, Calvin demonstrated unwavering dedication, rising through the ranks to become a sergeant. Over the course of 8 years, he served honorably, including a deployment to Iraq, where he faced the harsh realities of war and survived. His service was marked by a deep sense of responsibility and loyalty to his country. Calvin was also a family man. He was engaged to his fiancée, with whom he shared 2 children. Calvin took great pride in his role as a father and ensured that his children were well cared for. His devotion to his family and his commitment to his country painted the picture of a man who valued responsibility, love, and service. On the night of May 24, 2015, Calvin and his fiancée decided to take a walk through downtown Memphis, Tennessee, after spending the evening on Beale Street. The popular entertainment district was filled with music, laughter, and crowds enjoying the lively night atmosphere. As they strolled along South 4th Street, near the FedEx Forum, their peaceful walk suddenly took a dangerous and tragic turn. A dark-colored vehicle carrying 3 men approached the couple. Instead of simply passing by, the men directed their attention toward Calvin's fiancée, making inappropriate remarks. This harassment quickly escalated when Calvin, unwilling to tolerate the behavior, stepped in to defend her. What began as a verbal exchange rapidly turned into a heated argument. Tensions soared, and in an instant, the situation turned violent. One of the men in the car pulled out a firearm, and before Calvin could react, gunshots rang out. He was struck 3 times, collapsing onto the pavement as his fiancée watched in horror. The shooting was swift and merciless, leaving bystanders shocked and unable to intervene. The assailants wasted no time fleeing the scene, speeding off in their vehicle and vanishing into the night. The sounds of the gunshots echoed through the streets, cutting through the usual city noise, and moments later, Calvin lay critically wounded on the ground. At approximately 12:05 a.m., Memphis police officers from the Entertainment District Unit responded to reports of the shooting. Upon arriving at the scene, they found Calvin lying critically injured on the ground. Emergency responders immediately rushed him to Regional 1 Hospital, where medical professionals fought to save his life. Despite their best efforts, the gunshot wounds were too severe, and shortly after arriving, Calvin was pronounced dead. Law enforcement launched a thorough investigation into the shooting. Officers scoured the area for evidence, reviewing surveillance footage and interviewing witnesses. Descriptions of the 2 men involved in the shooting were gathered, with witnesses providing critical details. The driver of the vehicle was described as a black male between 22 and 25 years old, with a light complexion, hazel eyes, and a high fade hairstyle with curls on top. His accomplice, the shooter, was also described as a black male in the same age range but with a darker complexion and a chubby face. He wore his hair in a fade style and had a small to medium build. Witnesses also provided a description of the vehicle involved in the crime. It was described as a light green or gray 4-door sedan, possibly a Dodge Stratus, Ford Taurus, or a similar model. Unfortunately, there was no visible license plate or distinguishing marks on the car, which made tracking it difficult. Despite the efforts to gather information and review surveillance footage, the suspects remained at large, and the case went cold. A $20,000 reward was offered for information leading to the arrest of the suspects, but even with this incentive, the case stalled. The attackers seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. The Wilhite family was left in despair, knowing that the killers were still out there, walking free. Then, in May 2024, nearly 9 years after the tragedy, there was a breakthrough in the case. Detectives received a tip that led them to identify Timothy Davis as a suspect. This new lead reignited the investigation, and in February 2025, Davis, now 33 years old, was arrested. Davis was charged with second-degree murder in connection to the crime, a major development after years of no progress. He was formally charged, and his bond was set at $250,000. However, questions remained about his full involvement. Was Davis the gunman, or did he play another role in the crime? Timothy Davis, born in 1991, had a history that had raised concerns in the community. While he had not previously been involved in any high-profile criminal activities, his history with the law showed a pattern of troubling behavior. Davis had run-ins with the legal system, including several arrests on various charges. Most notably, he had been involved in several violent incidents during his younger years, some of which had left a lasting impression on the local authorities. His arrest marked a pivotal moment in the case, but it also opened the door to further investigation. While Davis was facing charges, the case was not fully closed, as it remained unclear whether he was the gunman or simply an accomplice in the crime. Investigators continued to work diligently to piece together the full extent of Davis's involvement and to determine if additional suspects would be identified and brought to justice. For Calvin's mother, Davis's arrest brought a sense of relief, but it did not erase the grief of losing her son. She expressed her frustration with how long it had taken for justice to reach this point, stating that someone must have known more about the incident. Despite the breakthrough, she remained focused on the fact that at least one other suspect was still walking free after nearly a decade. The pursuit of justice was not over for the Wilhite family. While Davis's arrest was a significant step forward, the fight for complete closure continued. As long as the remaining suspect remained at large, the case would not be considered fully resolved.
Christopher Green was the kind of young man people remembered. His smile was easy, his laughter genuine, and in a town like Bangor, Michigan, where faces were familiar and stories traveled fast, Christopher stood out for all the right reasons. At just 19 years old, he was straddling the fragile line between adolescence and adulthood, carrying dreams bigger than the small town that raised him. Growing up, Christopher learned early about hard work and kindness. His family, tight-knit and deeply rooted in the community, instilled in him a deep sense of loyalty and hope. Although life in Bangor could be quiet, Christopher found color and purpose in simple things. Friendships that felt like family, weekend bonfires under the stars, and the growing awareness that his life was only just beginning filled his days with meaning. Among the constants in his life was Lisa Cousins. The two had known each other for years, their paths crossing often in a town where everyone eventually bumped shoulders. What began as friendship slowly blossomed into something more profound. They were dating, not without complications, but with a sincerity that those around them could clearly see. For Lisa, Christopher was more than just a boyfriend. He was a safe haven. Lisa's home life was a storm she rarely spoke of. Her father, Floyd Cousins, had a reputation for violence that clung to him heavily. His temper was legendary in Bangor, swift, brutal, and unpredictable. Behind closed doors, Lisa bore the weight of that fury. Christopher knew enough to be wary, but loved her enough to stay close, offering the kind of refuge her own family denied her. Being with Christopher was a quiet act of defiance and survival for Lisa. Yet love, even the purest kind, can stir the darkest jealousies. Ray Edward Barry lived not far from either of them. He was a loner by nature who watched more than he participated, blending into the background of Bangor life. Inside him, something bitter festered. Barry had developed an unhealthy fixation on Lisa, a silent obsession that grew sharper each time he saw her hand intertwined with Christopher's partifest. His longing twisted into resentment, and over time, he did not just envy Christopher, he grew to hate him. On the 9th of December, 2002 winter had settled firmly over Bangor. The air was sharp, and the ground was frozen solid beneath a layer of fresh, white snow. It was the kind of cold that burned the skin, the kind that usually drove people inside early. Yet that night, somewhere along the deserted stretch of 60th Street, hatred erupted into bloodshed. Christopher's body was discovered battered and lifeless, his wounds telling a story of savage violence. He had been stabbed repeatedly and beaten with a force fueled by rage, then left alone under the indifferent Michigan sky. Blood soaked into the snow around him, vivid and horrifying against the pristine white. It was a scene that would haunt the town for years to come. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of confusion and grief. Investigators zeroed in on Floyd Cousins almost immediately. His history of violence, his strained relationship with Lisa, and the rumors swirling around town made him an obvious suspect. Interviews were conducted, alibis checked, and background scrutinized. Despite the darkness that surrounded Floyd, there was no direct link tying him to the murder, No weapon, no witnesses, and no confession emerged. As days turned into weeks and the year drew to a bitter close, the investigation stalled. Christopher's family, raw with grief, clung to hope that justice would eventually find its way through the freezing fog. However, the case quietly slipped into the cold files. His name became just another entry on a list, his photo tucked away in a drawer, and his family left aching without answers. Lisa, burdened by loss and trauma, moved on with her life as best she could, yet the ghost of that December night followed her everywhere. Christopher's death was a wound she carried in silence, a reminder that love, her safest refuge, had been stolen violently from her. For nearly a decade, Christopher's murder remained an open wound in Bangor's memory. His family refused to let his story fade. His mother became a tireless advocate, writing letters to the sheriff's department, attending public meetings, and organizing community vigils. Her voice, raw and determined, echoed through the quiet halls of justice that had too long failed her son. In 2011, a whisper found its way into the right ears. Rumors had lingered for years about Ray Edward Berry, unsettling comments he had made when drunk and offhand remarks that seemed to hint at knowledge no innocent man should have made investigators look his way. Fueled by a renewed determination, they re-examined the evidence. Technological advances allowed for a second look at the forensic details. They reviewed the footprints left in the snow, the slight inconsistencies in Barry's past statements, and the chilling fact that Barry had no solid alibi for the night Christopher died. Witnesses began coming forward. They did not bring smoking guns, but they offered shards of a narrative that, when pieced together, painted a damning picture. Barry had been obsessed with Lisa and furious that she had chosen Christopher. He had made veiled threats and spoken bitterly about getting even. In the context of these revelations, the motive crystallized. Jealousy, rejection, and rage had fueled the crime. In 2013, Ray Edward Berry was arrested and charged with the murder of Christopher Green. His trial unfolded against the backdrop of a town desperate for closure but terrified of reliving the trauma. In court, the prosecution carefully unraveled the tangled threads of the case. They showed the jury a young man, Christopher, full of hope and kindness. They revealed the darkness that had conspired to take him away. They walked through Barry's disturbing statements, the forensic links, and the motive rooted in Lisa's choice to love someone else. Lisa herself took the stand, her voice steady but her pain unmistakable. She spoke of her relationship with Christopher. She described how they had cared deeply for each other and how he had given her strength in her darkest moments. She spoke of the fear she had lived with in her father's house and of the joy Christopher had brought into her life despite it all. Her testimony cut through the courtroom with devastating force, reminding everyone that this was not just about evidence or arguments, it was about a real life that had been stolen. The defense leaned heavily on the shadow of Floyd Cousins. They painted him as the more likely killer, pointing to his well-documented violence, his proximity, and his threats. However, it was not enough. The case against Berry, built slowly and methodically over years, stood firm. After a tense deliberation, the jury found Ray Edward Berry guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although it was a hollow victory for those who loved Christopher, no verdict could bring him back. Justice, however long delayed, had finally come. Still, for Christopher's mother, for Lisa, and for the town of Bangor, the conviction brought something resembling peace. A brutal chapter had closed, though the ache of loss would never fully heal. In 2025, the story of Christopher Green aired nationally on Cold Case Files, in the episode titled Blood Red Snow. It captured the heartache of a mother's endless fight for justice, the quiet strength of a young woman who survived unbearable loss, and the life of a boy who should have had the chance to grow up. Today, Christopher is remembered not for the violence that ended his life, but for the kindness, laughter, and love he gave so freely. His story is a testament to the power of perseverance, the strength of community, and the enduring truth that even in the coldest winters, some memories burn too brightly to ever be forgotten.
Earl James McDaniel was born in 1931 in Kansas City, Missouri. Not much is known about his early years, but by the 1960s, he had already entered the criminal justice system. McDaniel's record included time spent in prison in Washington state during the 1960s, and over the years, he accumulated a series of arrests across the country, particularly in the 1980s. His offenses were mostly alcohol-related, including multiple arrests for driving under the influence. His criminal history, though not marked by violent crime, painted the picture of a man whose life was shaped by legal trouble and poor decisions. Despite these encounters with the law, McDaniel continued to lead a nomadic existence, moving from state to state and rarely settling down. By the fall of 1984, McDaniel was 53 years old. On the 11th of September of that year, he was arrested in Oskaloosa, Iowa, for driving while intoxicated. After that, McDaniel vanished without a trace. There were no further official records of his movements, and for nearly 6 weeks, his whereabouts remained a mystery. His disappearance sparked no immediate alarm. McDaniel had lived a transient life for years, and his absence was not immediately seen as unusual. Then, on the 30th of October, 1984, a grim discovery was made in Lono County, Arkansas. Workers from the Department of Transportation were mowing the grass along Interstate 40 when they stumbled upon the body of a man abandoned by the side of the road. Law enforcement was immediately called to the scene. The state of decomposition made it difficult to identify the victim, and there were no immediate signs of identification on the body. An autopsy was conducted, and the medical examiner determined that the cause of death was strangulation, ruling out the possibility of an accidental death. However, without any identification on the body, the investigation quickly stalled. At the time, forensic technology was limited. With no DNA analysis available and only basic tools for criminal investigations, the case grew colder with each passing year. For 4 decades, the man's identity remained a haunting enigma. The case was filed away as just another cold case, with no new leads or advancements in the investigation. In 2024, the Arkansas State Police made the decision to reopen the investigation, hopeful that modern forensic techniques might finally provide answers. The remains were sent to a specialized DNA facility in Texas, where experts used advanced testing methods, including genetic genealogy, to examine the remains. After months of uncertainty, a breakthrough finally emerged in March 2025. The facility confirmed that the remains belonged to Earl James McDaniel, a 53-year-old man originally from Kansas City, Missouri. To confirm the identity beyond doubt, investigators compared McDaniel's DNA with that of his daughter, who was living in Washington state. The comparison was conclusive, and McDaniel's identity was officially confirmed after nearly 4 decades of uncertainty. Earl James McDaniel's life had been one of constant movement, legal troubles, and instability. Born in Kansas City, Missouri, McDaniel's early years were shrouded in mystery. However, by the 1960s, he had been entangled in the criminal justice system. His time in prison in Washington state in the 1960s seemed to be a pivotal moment in his life, marking the beginning of his repeated run-ins with the law. His later arrests in the 1960s for offenses like drunk driving showed a man whose lifestyle was continually marked by poor choices and poor judgment. Though McDaniel had been arrested multiple times, he was not a violent criminal. His life, however, remained marked by repeated offenses and a lack of stability. He moved from state to state, unable to find permanent residence or employment. Despite his troubled history, McDaniel was a father to one daughter, who was living in Washington state at the time of the case's resolution in 2025. His daughter had spent decades hoping for answers about her father's disappearance, never knowing the true circumstances of his death. McDaniel's disappearance in 1984 raised a number of questions. His last known contact with law enforcement came on the 11th of September, when he was arrested for drunk driving in Oskaloosa, Iowa. After that, McDaniel seemingly vanished, leaving no trace of his whereabouts. His body was discovered nearly 2 months later, lying abandoned near the side of a road in Arkansas. The location of his body, found along Interstate 40 in an isolated area, suggested that McDaniel may have been traveling through the region or that he had been targeted by someone familiar with the area. The cause of death, which was strangulation, was a clear indication that McDaniel had been killed deliberately and that his death was likely the result of a personal attack. Though no signs of struggle were evident at the scene, the method of death raised new questions. Was McDaniel the victim of a random act of violence? Or did he know his killer? Investigators speculated that McDaniel's killer may have had a personal connection to him, as the act of strangulation often involves some level of familiarity or personal animosity between the victim and the perpetrator. In 2024, with the help of modern forensic technology, the Arkansas State Police reopened the cold case, determined to uncover new leads and bring closure to McDaniel's long unsolved death. The breakthrough in 2025, after the identification of McDaniel's remains, revived interest in the case. Investigators turned their focus to piecing together the last days of McDaniel's life. Who had he encountered between his arrest in September 1984 and the discovery of his body in October? With strangulation as the confirmed cause of death, the possibility that McDaniel was killed by someone he knew remained a central focus of the investigation. The Arkansas State Police are still looking for any information about McDaniel's final days, hoping that new leads will shed light on the circumstances of his murder. As the investigation continues, the Arkansas State Police are urging anyone with information about McDaniel's death to come forward. While the identity of the victim has been resolved, the mystery surrounding his death remains unsolved. Investigators are still working to uncover the truth behind McDaniel's tragic end. Anyone with information about his movements between September and October 1984 is asked to contact the Arkansas State Police.